Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is the 6th day of November 2015, Friday. Looks like the rain that we've been having is going to soon move by us. So for those of you who don't like the rain but need the rain, we probably won't have as much of it today as possible. On another front, I'm made to understand that one of our providers or phone service providers is experiencing some problems, and as a result of that, phone calls from Flow can't be made. If you're using data as well, I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, but my phone is extremely slow, and maybe that's because everyone now has switched over to using data to communicate as well. We trust that at some point in time our phone lines will be operational and you will be able to call through here as well. Paul tells me that he has checked all of our phone lines and there are dial tones there, so hopefully, at least on the landline. So let's see what happens, on the mobile side of things as well. So I want to wish you good morning. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Radio Cayman. Those of you who have allowed us into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work. For those of you who are privileged to have to listen to radio where you're working as well. I'm your host, Orit Connor, and of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. You're welcome to join me on For the Record with your suggestions, comments, critique. You can do that by calling us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow Lime, 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. You can also email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. Today being Friday, it is not unusual for us to have in the studio with us Mr. Christopher Saunders and Mr. Steve Macfield. Mr. Macfield is on his way in, and Mr. Macfield is actually here. He's coming in the studio now. And we also have with us Mr. Chris Saunders. Chris, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, O.C., and welcome, Steve. It's good to be here again. Steve, you want to slip over and take your seat? Come, I'm used to you in this seat here. Come.
Okay, it's just good.
I kind of like my seat over there, and I guess I got used to that seat.
Yeah, you almost got in before me this morning, Chris.
Yeah, I left.
Looks like you're more anxious than me to get in here, huh?
I left really early because, honestly, O.C., that traffic thing is driving me nuts.
Yes.
I really can't. The amount of time that we lose stuck in traffic in this country. And it's something that needs to be done about it.
Yep.
Yes, I was in traffic too, and I was on the radio on the radio with those young men from Rooster, talking about one of the headlines in the Compass this morning
about the school and
about the school for the juveniles.
Oh, okay. One about the juvenile.
And how the juvenile detention center, and how one man who is a prison director could say that he doesn't need it because he has a place up in Norfolk where he can keep them and to comply with the Constitution. And I was saying that if they read it, and what did they think about it? Because here's one man who comes from someplace else and decides how we are going to comply with our constitutional duties. And as a result of that, $600 and something thousand worth of cement, another 600 is thrown away in a foundation someplace else, and we have not done anything about it. And then there's all the blame game. One is saying, "Oh, it didn't happen in our administration; it happened in the other people's administration." And I'm wondering, how is it that somebody who could come from England or someplace else can say that putting juveniles in Norfolk with a petition to separate from adults is complying with the fact that you should have them separated from adult prison, because a juvenile detention center is something completely different.
Yeah, it's not within his remit to determine policy.
Exactly.
And if he has said that to any politician, they really need to take him and put him in his.
Well, that's what the compass said, that he told the government, he told the people, and I wonder, and what it does show me is how we always capitulate to somebody else from someplace else, and as a result of that, we are not going to ever become mature enough to tell people this is our business and that we're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah, well, talking about that, Mr. Macfield, and this is going to put me right off the subject right away.
That's all right.
But we promised that we would talk about the Caymanian protection law, the immigration laws, how it evolved and everything else. And I started. I had this book all along, right?
Yes.
A Special Son, about the life of Mr. Ormond Panton, written by David Martins.
Yes.
And I had it all of the time. I've read excerpts from it, but never read the whole book. So I decided that, and I'm holding this up for the camera to see as well, because people need to read this. And I wanted to look in this book to see what comments that Mr. Ormond had about the Caymanian protection law.
Yes.
Because I think he may have been the second chairman of the Caymanian protection board.
Yes.
He was there in the 70s.
That's right.
He was. I was trying to determine who the first chairman was, and you may know that, or we'll try to find that out. But he was certainly appointed by Jim Borden.
That's right.
After he left politics.
That's
so I
right.
wanted to see, and in here he talks about his battles that he had with Commissioner Gerard, and he talks about the Caymanian people and politicians in general, even his own family members, who deferred to Commissioner Gerard. He talks about one prominent inspector in the Cayman Islands, who it was alleged that Commissioner Gerard slapped.
Yes.
At one point in time. And Mr. Ormond detested the authorities trying to impose their will, his will, on the people here. So just to say that.
I am glad that you brought that up, because to supplement what you have done, what you have found in the book, I have the original of the West Indian reports from 1962.
Okay.
That he look older than me.
And I have the Jamaica law reports of 1955. And this gives you a chronological history of 3 cases that Mr. Panton had to take to the courts.
And he mentions that in his book as well.
Well, here are the 3 cases here.
And
one against Gerard.
And he took them all to the Court of Appeals.
All,
and one actually went to the Privy Council.
Yeah, one went from the Magistrates Court to the Court of Appeal because they say they couldn't find the Grand Court law, which would allow him to appeal to the Grand Court.
And they found it in Spanish Town.
Yes, yes. And this chronicles Mr. Panton's problems with the Commissioner of Police, soon the Commissioner of Police, soon the judge. Robinson.
Yes.
And soon.
And then he had a case with the Wattlers with the land.
But these and one of these cases is very interesting. What he was charged with, that's the case against Robinson. That's the case against Robinson. I just want to. Just to start.
Sure.
Just to start, the case against Robinson, Mr. Panton was charged with the following offense. He was charged with unlawfully did publish the following words to wit. Have you seen those?
Yes. That's in the book. That was interesting how he did that.
Ormond Lauder Panton likes to think of Mr. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
Robinson. That's the one about the monkey.
To the terms of the following old proverbs, thus, when monkeys are prone to their antic passes, the higher they climbed, the more they expressed their asses, which tended as a breach of the peace.
Yep.
That is what he was charged with.
And he put it on his
He put it on his door.
His door. He put it on the public notice board. And I think he put it on the government building as well.
And the government building as well.
Building, yeah.
And he was arrested for those. He was arrested for those. The warrant was sent for his arrest.
Yep.
And he had 3 warrants for his arrest. And he was arrested for that. That as an offense was a breach of the peace. And then he was arrested by the Pocogda police.
And actually, in his book, he says that Mr. Vernon,
yes,
and another police officer came to his shop.
Yes,
they had guns and everything,
yeah,
and
yes.
he said that Robinson wants you in court now.
Yes,
and
yes.
He said he would go to court. And when he got outside, he saw the Jeep there. And he said he wasn't going in the Jeep, that he was walking because he knew he wanted to walk because he knew that all of the people would see the police walking with him.
Yes.
And he was a very popular person in Georgetown at that point in time.
That's right.
And when he went to court, Robinson
had the warrants waiting for him and arrested him and kept him in a room.
And he wouldn't, he asked for 2 weeks so he could get obtained counsel from Jamaica, and Robinson said no, he was going to try him then.
That's right.
Eventually, he relented, and he gave him 1 week.
That's right.
To get his counsel from from Jamaica.
And the other case with Gerard is when he was charged with not paying the taxes on his truck. Yes. And Gerard had his truck seized.
But there were 14 other people that hadn't done that, including the government.
That's right.
And one of the I think his uncle or something like that, who was a justice of the peace at the time.
And Gerard had the police seize his truck, and Gerard acted as magistrate, along with the justice of the peace on the case, and found him guilty. And that is the one that went all the way to the Court of Appeal in Jamaica, and was a breach of natural. Today it would have been a conflict of interest.
Same person who signed the warrant was the one that ended up prosecuting him.
The prosecutor was the one that went up as a judge. But the case ended on a breach of natural justice, and as of that, there's a running battle with him and Gerard for Gerard's whole life in Cayman.
Yeah.
And one time, Mr. Ormond lived just outside of Gerard's yard.
Right in this area here.
Right in the same area. And for days, Gerard couldn't come out his door, couldn't come out his house, because Mr. Ormond had his gun pointed at Gerard's door. Mr. Ormond was lying on his cistern. And Sergeant Nixon then, who was the Commissioner of Police, and Rod Watler, they were going to Ormond, you got to stop this foolishness. And Ormond said that he was gonna do Gerard in. And I have been told that they had a dance at Gerard for his departure. And in those days
he wasn't going.
Mr. Ormond didn't go.
He eventually went.
He eventually went, and he was sitting on the steps at the Old Town Hall. He was sitting on the steps of the Old Town Hall because remember the Town Hall was built up then. Yeah. And Gerard came outside as he was leaving, asked him to shake his hand. And Ormond said, I wouldn't kick you. Can't for anything.
And he said if it was left to him, he would be leaving here, but he would be leaving in a coffin.
In a pine box.
In a pine box.
That's what he said.
That's what he told. And what was funny also that he points out that because of the proximity of his house to Gerard's, he could get into his yard and just stand by the fence and say whatever he wanted to say. And he knew that Gerard was listening. That's what he did when one of the when he got the cable back from his lawyer in Jamaica telling him that his case had been successful. He went right to the fence and he read out. There was another time too, he said, when his daughters Lulu and KK, that Gerard had a wife had called him and told him that they were picking mangoes from and those days in Cayman, mangoes belonged to everybody. You could go and pick mangoes off anybody's tree.
That's right.
And he said he got on his bicycle and he came home and he said he went out into the yard and he said, girls, bring those mangoes for daddy. Just to rile up Gerard. But I was telling Chris and them earlier that because he was a young man and Gerard was also a young man, and they both were really had tempers flared up quite a bit, but yet they were friends to a certain extent, because he told a story in his book about he used to go to Gerard's place and drink.
Yeah,
and
well-
they used to drink whiskey.
Well-
and one time they ended up with a big fight there. They mashed up the furniture, mashed up the plates and everything, and he went home after. And then later on, Gerard's wife came over and said that her husband said he must come back and help her clean up the mess that he had made there. And he said
Yes.
he ran her out of the house.
There was another time when he and Pat Alonzo Henderson
Yeah, yes.
were driving their cars around Georgetown. In those days, you didn't have to have a insurance or anything to drive a car. You could just buy the car, bring it, and put it on the boat, and then drive it off, drive it home. And they were creating a nuisance, and Gerard sent the commissioner of police, then what people call the inspector of police, Carl Nixon, to try to rein them in. And Carl came back and said he couldn't bring them. And Gerard got in the car himself and chased them down to West Bay, and arrested them with Mr. Ira Walton, Ira Thompson, and brought them to Gerard's house. Didn't take them to prison, brought them to Gerard's house, and he had 3 bottles of rum on the table. And they said the first one who go down was the one who was going to get locked up. and they say that when Ormond and Pat Alonzo wake up, Gerard was still drinking. they had gone. Gerard had drunk them under the table.
Yeah.
But there's also a different side of Gerard too. There's the side of Gerard who broke up the segregation in Georgetown. You remember that?
Oh, was that? Sorry.
Gerard broke up the segregation in Georgetown with his state dances.
Right. And then after that, what they did was they switched, and the white people, the upper class people, then switched and had their dance at Petra House, which is Grand Old House now.
House, yes.
And then the black people had their dances
in the town
hall after Gerard had integrated everyone, and they decided
that's right,
that they were going to split up.
And it happened with one of your uncles.
Yeah, Malachi.
So what Mr. Villafarge and all of them went to Gerard and say, I come for the money to have the dance. And Gerard said, well, we didn't know anything. But yeah, this is usual things. Whenever a warship comes in, we have a state dance. And Gerard says, and they say that we have the dance for us tonight and a dance for the colored people tomorrow night. And Gerard didn't think that was right.
Yeah.
And so Gerard waited and gave them the money to have the dance, and the white people would have the dance in the town hall. And Gerard got Miss Annie Connor, that owned Copper Kettle, Therese Carita's mother, and his uncle Malachi Connor, who that year had won the best dress contest in Cayman. In those days, you used to have functions where you have the best dressed man, and you talk about double-breasted cream serge suit with Fedora felt hat, and all of those beautiful shoes with all with the wing tips. And Gerard told them that he was going to integrate the dance that night, that he should wait outside for his signal. And everybody was inside the dance that night. All the white people were there dancing that night. And when the dance get hot and heavy, all the music, because now they only had one local band, that was James Thomas and the Merry Boys. And Gerard went outside and brought in Malachi Connor and Miss Annie Connor. And Gerard let his wife dance with Malachi, and Gerard danced with Miss Annie. And all the white people start to leave the dance.
Yep.
And Gerard told the people, you can leave, except if you're still servant and you leave, that would be the end of your job. So Gerard fired a lot of people through that episode.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor. My guest in studio with me this morning, Mr. Steve McField, and Mr. Christopher Saunders. And you heard a little historical perspective here. And Mr. McField has that basically in his head because he knows about it. A lot of it I have gleaned basically from reading and doing research. And I hope that you would do the same as well. Please stay tuned. We're going to a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the evolution of immigration laws in the Cayman Islands. We're going to start even before the Caymanian Protection Law, because as you heard, Mr. McField has some other documents that predate the Cayman Island, the Caymanian Protection Law, 1972. I also have with me the laws of the Cayman Islands, the immigration restrictions, British subject. law or act as well with me, and that one is date. I'll try to find a date on that. Please stay tuned. Commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk more about this. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, Mr. Steve Macfield and Mr. Christopher Saunders. I also want to remind you that For the Record is brought to you by Sagicor, Wise Financial Thinking for Life. We promised you that we want to have a discussion on the evolution of the immigration law in the Cayman Islands, and in particular about work permits and Caymanian status. I want to read an excerpt for you from the Immigration Restrictions British Subject Law of Law 15 of 1961. And in it, it defines, it says here, for the purpose of this law, a British subject shall be deemed to belong to the islands if. And what was important, and for you to obtain belonger status, one of the requirements, first and foremost, you had to be a British subject. Yeah, if you were a subject of any other
That's right.
country, like the United States.
Yes, or Canada or
well, Canada you would still be because part of the Commonwealth.
Yes, the Commonwealth, a British subject, yes.
But let's say Spain or Portugal or
yes,
something
yes,
like that, then you wouldn't qualify. So it says here, for the purposes of this law, a British subject shall be deemed to belong to the Cayman Islands, if he was born in the islands so birth in the islands or of parents who at the time of his birth were domiciled or ordinarily resident in the islands, or is domiciled in the islands or has been ordinarily resident in the islands continuously for a period of 5 years or more, and since the completion of such period of residence has not been ordinarily resident in any other part of Her Majesty's dominions or any territory under the protection of Her Majesty continuously for a period of 5 years or more. Also, if you obtain the status of a British subject while resident in the islands by reason of the grant by the governor of Jamaica or the administrator of a certificate of naturalization under the British Nationality Act 1948, or is a dependent of a person of whom any of the foregoing paragraphs apply. So you could be born here, or of parents who had been here, or you could be here for five years and continuously and not resident or domiciled in another jurisdiction, or if you obtained British citizenship by virtue of a certificate of naturalization under the British Nationality Act 1948, or if you were a dependent of a person. And it says, for the purpose of this law, a British subject shall be deemed to belong to a particular place outside the islands, and it tells you, what those were as well. So that was the definition that we had in 1961. Mr. Macfield, you want to add on that, or what do you have? Anything else that you have in relation to that?
Well, I can't add to that, but the Cayman Protection Law came after that.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did, it dropped a lot of those. It dropped a lot of those definitions that because there was no belonging status anymore. It did not continue the belonging status system.
Well, I think the 72 one still says
the 72
belongs.
one. Well, it's still, but it didn't say that you. It didn't say that you had to be not resident in any other.
Right. Those provisions in there in terms of
that.
Yes,
provisions were dropped.
Yeah.
In the 1971 one.
Okay.
But what was interesting in 1971 is that it tried to define who was a Caymanian in 1971, and in 1971 the one law had three or four definitions that define who could live here and who had the right to live here.
Mm-hmm.
It says that because in 1965 we had something we call a work permit law, that allowed people who were not Caymanians to work in the islands. It was called the work permit law. And the 1971 came in and outdated that one and brought in the work permit and brought in the gainful occupation license or the work permit.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yep.
And then it says that if you were domiciled, I think it was on the 27th of April 1971 when the law came into effect. If you were domiciled in the Cayman Islands on that day, or if you're all naval resident in the Cayman Islands on that day for at least 5 years, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And Section 22 said that if you had a work permit under the 1965 work permit law,
mm-hmm.
that you didn't need to have a work permit under the 1971 law that you were grandfathered in.
Right.
And all you had to do to be Caymanian, because you say you were deemed to be Caymanian.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You had to go to the court to get a declaration from the court to say that you were domiciled here or that you ordinarily resident for 5 years here, and then you were deemed to be a Caymanian. That could not be taken away from you. It didn't matter how long you stayed on the island.
Yep.
You were deemed to be Caymanian.
Yep. Any periods of absence.
Any periods of absence. Any periods of absence did not run against you. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the gist of the law as it was then, until we start having a lot of cases about what was domicile, what the word domicile meant, and residence, and of course one of the leading cases at the time was Roper, Roper's case that challenged the work permit system at that time. You remember what happened to Roper's case? Roper was a young man who came from Jamaica with a guy called Erlin Miles, who was a boy. He was a Boy Scout, and this Caymanian family met him in Jamaica when their son went over there to the All Island camp, and he came over with them. And Roper didn't have any parents. He lived with his grandparents, and he came over here, and they sort of adopted him, but unofficially. But they took him in and raised him. And of course, Roper was the first one that started the cleaning business.
That's Raglan Roper from Roper.
Raglan Roper.
Right. For the,
well, we're not
listening public.
We're not going to have enough time before we go to the break to talk about, but we need to talk about the Roper case because that is one of the pivotal cases.
It's still
precedent case.
It still is.
Precedent case in the Cayman Islands.
That's right.
But before, I think I have about a minute left, and I want to quickly read because the introduction of the Caymanian Protection Law, 1972, was debated in the 1972 session of the Cayman Islands Legislative
that was very
Assembly.
interesting.
And in Mr. Benson's contribution to the throne speech in 1973, the acknowledged by Mr. Warren Conley as being in the tunnel for some. He was talking about the fact that the immigration law had been in the tunnel for some time because we had dilly-dallied about passing it and everything else. Then Mr. Crook, who was the governor at the time, in him talking about the Caymanian Protection Law, he says, the Caymanian Protection Law confers Caymanian status on persons of British nationality who fulfill the required stipulations. A person who has Caymanian status will be regarded as a person belonging to these islands and having every right to take part freely in the affairs affecting these islands. A board consisting of Caymanians has been set up under that law, and they are the ones to adjudicate all applications for this status. Hence, more and more, the future of these islands is being vested in the hands of those who really live here. Now, that's a poignant statement.
That's right.
And my rhetorical question, is it still the same today?
No, not
really. Absolutely not.
Folks, please stay tuned. We're going to the news. When we come back, we'll have more discussions on the evolution of our immigration laws. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Conner. My guest in the studio with me this morning, Mr. Steve Macfield, Mr. Chris Saunders. We're taking a historical look at the evolution of immigration laws here in the Cayman Islands. We're going to be talking about some precedent-setting cases as well, too. One you heard about earlier, Mr. McField mentioned the Raglan Roper case. We also, and that one had to do basically with being resident here in the Cayman Islands and not being deported by the government. The second one has to do with the James Attridge case. That one was even more important because even in those days, people would leave things just like they do now when they leave papers on MLA's windscreens and stuff like that. Someone put in the post office box, I think it was Mr. Attridge post office box or someone else, a list of the names that the executive council had of people who had been recommended for the grant of Caymanian status and who had not been touched. They had done absolutely nothing with them and had granted others. So you'll hear about that as well because we have it all documented. But we have someone on the phone line, so we're going straight there. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Ivan. How are you?
All right, OC, Mr. Steve, and your other guest there.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr.
and
Ivan.
the listening public. Come off your subject a little bit. I want to advertise about the raffle we're having for the fundraising. Well, Mr. Steve can elaborate on half I left.
Okay.
I got the account set up especially for that. Anybody want to contribute, you can go to Cayman National Bank and under the fundraising. Fundraising. So that's a fundraising to build piece on the hall because hall is too small, and that be included. It'd be a museum, a kitchen, and everything. So in the future, we can even use that for hurricane shelter. So I want the whole public to support this worthy cause, and you can get a ticket from the office, Mr. Godberg McLean, Mr. Steve McField, the champion ticket seller, Neil Godfrey, and Ivan Finder. So I want all the members and the public to get behind this and make this happen. And on a better note now, we were talking about the dances, the white dances, I guess you would call it. This is a story from Double O. The first president of the White People Association was Dr. Rose. Okay? I'll leave that with you all.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ivan. Thank you very much. Folks, again, a little bit of historical perspective. I will read here. On the 11th meeting of the Select Committee, this was a Select Committee of the whole House of the Legislative Assembly held on Wednesday, the 24th of March, 1999, it was agreed, quote, that the Law Revision Commissioner, Mr. Michael Bradley, CMG QC LLB, together with the Chief Immigration Officer, Mr. Orrit Connor, and if you notice, I don't have any designations after my name. Yes. Just plain old Orrit Connor.
Yes, yeah. No OB or
right?
MB
Nothing.
yes.
Be asked to review the immigration law from 1972 together with the Constitution to tabulate in sequence the various changes made to date in relation to immigration, citizenship, and to set out reasons for these changes in order to establish a clear history of the immigration laws and the Constitution. So I'm not talking, when you hear me talk, I'm not just talking, on a whim. I've done research.
Yes,
I've worked with this, and so has Mr. McField. We noted that the contents of such minutes were only communicated to both of us on Tuesday, the 20th of April, 1999, and our first meeting to conduct the review took place on Wednesday, the 21st of April, 1999, which time some six meetings were held after that. And we just gave a historical background, and I want to read this because this is what we said we want to talk about the evolution. I'll give a historical background, and then I'm going to hand back over to Mr. McField. We said the law relating uniquely to the Cayman Islands regarding immigration and allied matters dates from 75 years ago. This is in 1999 that we were saying it, that it dated back 75 years ago, when the Assembly of Justices and Vestry of the Cayman Islands enacted the Passport and Permit Control Law 1924, Law 2 of 1924. This was followed by the Passport Law 1925, Law 6 of 1925, the Regulation of Immigration Law 1934, Law 3 of 1934, the Deportation of British Subjects Law 1941, and that's Law 10 of 1941, the Deportation British Subject Law 1944, Law 8 of 1944, the Aliens Law, Law 8 of 1961, and the Immigration Restriction British Subject Law 15 of 1961. And we say there the last two laws were incorporated in the 1963 revised edition of the Laws of the Cayman Islands as chapters 3 and 67 respectively, and the Deportations British Subject Law. So that was the historical perspective that we gave on it. And then we also said here that it was the only other law before 1971 was the Work Permit Law of 1965, Mr. Macfield, which you talk about.
Yes.
It says, during the period, the subject of this review, there have been 3 substantive and 6 amending laws dealing with the immigration and allied matters. We had the Caymanian Protection Law 1971. We had the Caymanian Protection Amendment Law 1977. The Caymanian Protection Law 1984. The Caymanian Protection Amendment Law 1987, the Caymanian Protection Amendment Law 1988, Law 4 of 1988, the Immigration Law 1992, Law 13 of 1992, the Immigration Amendment Law 1993, Law 12 of 1993, the Immigration Amendment Law 1994, Law 4 of 1994, and the Immigration Cayman Brac and Little Cayman Immigration Board Amendment Law 1998. So up until 1999, when we were writing this, this is basically, these were the laws that were in place before that. And then we go on to talk about Caymanian status and stuff like that.
Yes.
But I don't want to get too much into that. So what we basically said here, before the 1972 law, Mr. Macfield, that the most recent one before that was the Work Permit Law of 1965. And that's the one that Roper situation fell under. Now, before I go to you, Mr. Macfield, I just want to say just one more thing. During the debate in the legislature,
I would like to hear. I would like you to read those.
Yeah.
Because
Well, I'll read this part. It says, and this is what the Governor Crook was saying, and we have the debate of all the members here. Under the former laws, right, and talking about the 1965 one, for instance, confusion was possible. Persons could be given immigration clearance to come into the islands with no guarantee that a work permit would be issued to them. So you could come here, but you didn't have any guarantee that a work permit was issued. Nor was there any guarantee that even if they were given a work permit, that they would be given a license to operate. So you not only needed a work permit, but you needed a license to operate as well. A business within a license to operate a business within these islands. All of these functions have now been delegated to one board, which is set up under the Caymanian Protection Law. Thus, a person who has been given permission to enter and work in these islands will be ensured of being able to obtain all of the necessary permits. So because of the uncertainties that lay at that time, legislators were they were mindful of that and wanted to introduce this law. Now remember, we talked earlier about it where they dilly-dallied for about 8 years. They wouldn't do anything about the immigration law, and we see dilly-dallying further down the line when government decided not to set quotas in relation to Caymanian status. And these were all reactions to the changing times that we
Yes.
had at that point
Yes.
in time. So I'll pass over to you now, Mr. McFeel, in relation to the Roper case.
So Roper came here as a young man from Jamaica with this Caymanian family. But what happened? They didn't adopt him formally. It was a sort of informal adoption. Roper decided they sent him to learn to lay blocks, but he wasn't interested in bricklaying, and he decided that he would start cleaning people's places and charge them money. Now, before Roper came, that was usually women's work, and so Roper went downtown and got a bicycle and a bucket and a mop and started cleaning offices and things like that. And then he started cleaning the windows for people. And it became lucrative. They start paying Roper, and then Roper, from a bicycle, he went to a little motorcycle, and from a little motorcycle, he went to a little truck. And when certain people in the island saw that could be a lucrative business, they decided that that they wanted the business for themselves. Some local Caymanian people. By that time, Roper had met an American woman and had got married to her. She was from Chicago, I believe, and she introduced him to to his own products. She showed him how he could get his own products: Roper's aerosol, Roper's bathroom cleaner, Roper's this, Roper's that, and that really that drove the nail in the coffin of some of the upper class people who saw that as a lucrative business for themselves. And so they objected to his work permit. Roper had a work permit all those years that he had been here. And so the immigration turned his work permit down. He appealed to the executive council, which was the appellate body then, not like how it is now with an appeal tribunal. And the immigration law at the time said that once the executive council had made a decision on your appeal, that was final and could not be challenged in any court. Mm-hmm. So Roper went to all the lawyers of the day. And they told him that nothing they could do, they would have to leave the island. I had just left government then, and I was very curious about the immigration law because I was curious about Section 22. Because Section 22 of the immigration law said, of the protection law said, that if you had been gainfully occupied, if you had a gainful occupation license under the work permit law 1975, on the 27th of April, 1965, on the 27th of April 1997, when the protection law came into force, that you didn't need to have a work permit, you were grandfathered in. But no one had challenged that at all, no one. And so I was so happy when Roper came to see me, and I told him, well, I couldn't help him now because his right to appeal had gone. But I told him to reapply again for another work permit. So he reapplied for a second work permit, went through the channels, went to the board turned it down, and it went to executive council on appeal, and they turned it down, and then we filed for the judicial review. Now, one of the things that we had to do was get over the clause that says that we could not appeal to the courts. But there's an old case I remember when I was in school called Anisminic. Anisminic was a Jew, Jewish guy in Egypt whose property had been destroyed in the bombing of the Suez Canal by the British and the French. England had set up a compensation board to compensate people for all the destruction of the property that they had caused by the bombing. And Anisminic had put in his claim for compensation. And he was not satisfied with the claim that they gave him, and he tried to appeal the matter. And the legislation that set up the compensation from the United Kingdom says that once the compensation board had made a decision, it could not be challenged in any court. And Anisminic took his matter to the Court of Appeal and to Lord Denning, and the Maverick Lord Denning looked at the matter and says that clauses in colonial constitutions and in laws that try to ousted the court's jurisdiction from hearing matters relating to issues that came from those things were invalid, and that the court had a right to hear to see whether things had been done for the right reason or not, to words to that effect. And Lord Denning Lord Denning gave him remedy to bring his case before the Court of Appeal. So and it's made it became the precedent for that, and we cited that case before Sir John Summerfield, and he listened to it and allowed us to bring executive counsel in court. It was the first time in the history that the executive counsel had been taken to court. He heard the case, and he accepted the interpretation of Section 22 of the Caymanian Protection Law, and Sir Roper didn't need a work permit to operate. Now, the Cayman Protection Law also had a clause that says if you're ordinarily resident here for 5 years or domiciled for 5 years on that date, which was the 27th April 1971 when the law came into effect, that you were deemed to be Caymanian. And so we made a declaration that Roper was Caymanian, but Sir John Summerfield held that when Roper came here, he was a juvenile, and that he was his grandmother was in charge of him. She was his parent, and that he did not have the right to his own domicile, because his domicile had to be whatever his parents' domicile was, because he was a juvenile and could not establish his own domicile himself, and so we didn't get thrown the domicile point. But Roper's case then was appealed by the government to the Court of Appeal, and up to today, the government has not taken that case have not asked the Court of Appeal to hear that case.
And they never granted a work permit to Roper.
And they never granted a work permit, and because
but he didn't really need one, because that was part of the judgment.
He didn't need one, and out of abundance of caution, we had an injunction against the Executive Council and the Immigration Board to say that they could not remove him from the country, or if he left the country, they could not prohibit him from coming back and from working.
Yeah, folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I am your host, Orrit Connor. My guest in the studio is with me, historian, Mr. Alan Steve McFeel, and also learning with us today, Mr. Christopher Saunders.
Yes, I am.
As well. Please stay tuned. Lots more to come. Keep your thinking caps on. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record, where we have a very interesting conversation going on this morning. This is a teaching 2 hours for us this morning as well, because we hope that our listeners are taking all of this in as well. So we want to just wrap up on the Roper case,
I just want to wrap up the Roper case.
And then after that, then we're going to go to the immigration, the Caymanian Protection Law 1972. We're going to talk about belonger status and then how that evolved over the years as well.
The Roper case ended, like I said, with Roper not having to have a work permit. The government said they were taking it on appeal. They have not appealed it to this day to the Court of Appeal. So the Grand Court case of Roper is still the precedent for Caymanian status and for natural justice, and for and not telling him what they had against him. And not
informing him in advance.
Yes,
just dropping it on him like that. Yeah.
And we were ordered. The court ordered his costs to be paid by the government. Up on today, we have not collected that cost.
Really?
Yes.
A lot of interest.
Well, and from 1983, and I wonder what would happen today if we went back to court with a summons with directions.
Talk to the Auditor General about that one.
What would happen today? But we, at the time, it was a revolutionary judgment, and we had the idea, well, we'll leave well enough alone. Since we got what we wanted, we will leave well enough alone, because in those days, you could find other ways to skin a cat. And Mr. Orman always told me, because Mr. Orman was the chairman of the Immigration Board, and he always said to me, you didn't win that case, McPhee, you didn't win that case, It's just that I couldn't prove what I had to prove. Because they claimed they had information against Roper, but they couldn't bring the information to court, or they didn't bring the information to the court. And in any event, Roper did not need a work permit, because the Section 22 of the 1971 Immigration Cayman Protection Law grandfathered him in, and many other people followed, made a claim after that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Macri, you say you wanted in the Legislative Assembly in 1971, you wanted to hear some of the things. Now, it was interested in this case that the immigration, that the Caymanian Protection Law, the introduction of that, it was actually presented by Mr. Benson Ebanks.
Yes,
and Mr. Waddington was the seconder of that, and
yes.
then Trevor Foster objected to the legislation coming forward because he had concerns about Cayman Brac and Little Cayman in relation to trade and business license and stuff like that. While he supported it in other respects, he had some concerns there. But here's what Mr. Benson said. Mr. Benson said the Caymanian Protection Law is a fundamental piece of legislation. Notice has been served for many months now that this bill would be introduced, and in very broad terms, the content of the bill has been discussed. The chief complaint regarding our present law, the one that we talked about, right, governing work permits and immigration, is that it is a one-man show. And I'll tell you what he meant by that. The law seeks to establish a Caymanian Protection Board comprised of 7 members and to give the board functions other than the granting of licenses. So it was a one-man show because all of this was in the hands of the chief immigration officer.
Exactly.
And the chief immigration
That's
officer at that point in time was a British appointed person.
That's right.
So that's why Mr. Benson said that. Now let's look at the.
But there's something Mr. Craddock said.
I'll find out as well.
Yes, and to the effect that we were going to regret have given people Cayman status.
Okay.
And if you find that was very interesting.
Sure, I'll find out.
Yes.
But now let's talk about the 1971 law. The persons who were living here already and who were grandfathered in, and we talked about the Roper case before that.
Yes.
But we had other situations. You talk about the Collins family and stuff like that as well.
Yes.
I think another one of those who had a declaration was the late Desmond Seals. He went to the Grand Court and had a declaration because when the law came into effect, it made provisions in there that if you had been resident here, you could go to the Grand Court, have a declaration made that you had been resident. I think it was 5 years.
5 years, you had to be ordinary resident for 5 years.
Right, and you were deemed then.
And you were deemed to be
possess
Caymanian, or if you've been domiciled here.
Right.
And the question of what domicile meant.
Right.
And there was all kinds of cases say that if you have a grave soon, or if you had a grave plot, you were domiciled, or if you had a house or something, you were domiciled. But look at the Keith Collins situation. Keith Collins' sister and brothers had come here from Jamaica. You remember that they were Caymanian descent. Mm-hmm. Yes? Now, the 1971 law says that any child, or adopted child under the age of 18 years old who was born outside the Cayman Islands, or who with one parents or grandparents born in the Cayman Islands were deemed to be Caymanian. Now, Keith Collins' sister and his brother got their status under that provision because any child means any child, and then there's a definition of what any child meant. It meant a legitimate child born in wedlock with 2 people who were married. It didn't include illegitimate children. It only legitimate children. And then what was significant about it, you could be at any age. That's what it says, any child. It didn't say any age, comma. So the comma before any child had a class of children who was at any age could apply. And if you're adopted, you have to be under the age of 18 years old. Any child, comma, or any adopted child under the age of 18 years old. So there was a problem with Keith because Keith had been involved in politics in Jamaica. And everybody was frightened that this young Jamaican lawyer came on now was going to engage in politics and probably bring power to the system and think to Cayman and whatever. And they had to find a way to keep him out. So what they did, they amended the law and took the comma from behind any child. And the law then read, any child or adopted child under the age of 18 years old. And because Keith was over 18, he could not qualify like his sisters and brothers had done to get Caymanian status. And it took him over 10 years before when the law came in, he had to go through the whole he had to go through the whole period of being living here and getting to get a grant, but he was not grandfathered in under the 1970 law because of his political affiliations in Jamaica with politics.
Okay, let's look at the 1977 Cayman Islands Protection Law revised, which is Law 16 of 1977, and in relation to Caymanian status. Any person who is a British subject, and that was always in there,
Yes.
Which reminds me that we need to talk about the Hadjigate Clause as well in the
Yes,
1984
yes.
law, and we can demonstrate to people how sometimes our legislation was amended just to suit one person.
Yes.
One person,
Yes.
right? So it says any child, any person who is a British subject and is a legitimate or legitimated child or a stepchild or adopted child who has been legally adopted in any such manner as is recognized by the law of the domicile of such persons at the time of such adoption is a person who possesses Caymanian status and who is under the age of 18 shall for the purpose of this law be deemed to possess and enjoy Caymanian status. So we did that. And what they did was they put in the legitimated child, and what that meant was by operation of the legitimation law.
That's right.
If you were a child who was born out of wedlock,
Yes.
but you had the mother and father of that child, there was no legal impediment for either of one of them to be married, then once they got married, your birth became legitimated under that law.
Right.
So that's why they use the terminology legitimated child there.
And if you were not married, the child would automatically take the nationality of the mother.
Right, exactly, yes, yeah, because, Then we look at the other section now. This is person deemed to possess Caymanian status. Any British subject who prior to the 27th of March 1972.
Yes.
Now the 27th of March 1972 is a significant date because that's when the law came into effect, and basically that was the yardstick that was used from there on. That 27th of March was always recited, right? Mm-hmm. So is any British subject who prior to the 27th day of March 1972 was born in the Cayman Islands of parents. And we in the old law, we believe that we knew that they left out or of parents. Mm-hmm. So it meant that if you were born here or if you had parents born here, they didn't put the or in. It says of parents, at least one of whom at the time of the birth was domiciled or ordinarily resident in the Cayman Islands or was domiciled in the Cayman Islands in accordance with provision, blah, 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 ordinarily resident, shall from the coming into operation of this law be deemed to possess Caymanian status. And then they had provisions in there if you became registered as a under the British Nationality Act or naturalized under the British Nationality Act, that you had status automatically. If you were a British subject, a woman, a British subject, married to a Caymanian, you got it automatically by operation of law. You didn't have to wait the 7 years now. Now, one of the motivations for changing that was that, again, we had certain nationalities who came to the Cayman Islands. We know of the famous story where a man who, was of limited intelligence, I don't want to sound pejorative in any way, but of limited intelligence, was taken from the Georgetown dock, right, marched up to a marriage officer.
Yes.
And married. No family member knew about him getting married. I'm not sure that he knew what he was doing.
Exactly.
At the time
He was working on a cement ship.
Yeah.
With his cement boots on and everything.
And took him to get married. That was the motivation to change that law in respect of the automatic acquisition of status by virtue of marriage.
That's right.
Because just like the U.S. talks about their anchor babies, we were having anchor wives here in the Cayman Islands as well. So, that was the motivation, to change that. I'm told we have to go to a break now. We could talk all morning. We're going to have to get a commercial-free show for this. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Darrell Connor. My guest with me this morning, Mr. Steve McField, Mr. Christopher Saunders. One caller online. We ask that caller to hold on. As soon as we come from the commercial break, we'll take your call. Please stay tuned.
System.
For information that matters. For the record with Orit Connor continues right now on Radio Cayman.
Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor. Guest in the studio with me this morning, Mr. Christopher Saunders, Mr. Steve McField. We're discussing the evolution of immigration legislation in the Cayman Islands, in particular, citing some precedent-setting cases as well as more focused on Caymanian status, the acquisition and granting of Caymanian status than anything else. 3 callers on hold. We're going to the first caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. Wood.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Just fine, thank you, sir. Good morning to Mr. McField and to Mr. Saunders.
Good morning,
Morning,
sir.
Mr. H.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear those 2 gentlemen with you. A wealth of knowledge. Mr. McField, what you're talking about is my friend, Mr. Collins.
Yes.
My father, my mother, their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and my mother's great-great-grandparents. I came here 1969 to work. I've been here many times before, but not working it. And I was working for my cousin Jim Borden, because his mother and my mother are first cousins. They're both gone home now. And when I was running that Shell station in town for him, it was 1970 early, an immigration officer drove up, won't call the person's name, and told me that I'd have 3 days to go and get a work permit, I'd have to go to Jamaica where I was born, get a police record, come back here. I said, what in the world is this? Anyway, then I told Jim he couldn't believe it. So he said, let us just do this step for me, straighten it out. Anyway, did that, and back to go work permit for me, so forth. And when I told my father, he was a very Christian man, my father was, but he spoke to Mr. Dennis Foster, who was acting chief officer, and Dennis couldn't believe it. He just couldn't. He said, you're the same as I am. I was born in Jamaica. Probably spent more time than you did. And he told my father he's going to write an affidavit, and he'd sign it. And it said it was good for my father's children and grandchildren, whether they're born here or not. It was good for them, right? When I went to Mr. Bossett, applied for the, he had become, at that time when Mr. Foster did this, well, the chief of police was in charge, as you know, as chief immigration officer, wearing many hats, colonial system. Anyhow, Mr. Bostock said to me, he knew me as Mickey, he knew me, and that was 72, sometime the consulate that brought up this status thing, and he said, look, you didn't need to apply for this at all. He said you're automatically a Caymanian. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any difference whether you're born in Kingston, Jamaica. He said at the time when you were born, that Mr. Power was the British governor there of this, what was considered the westernmost parish of the island of Jamaica, the colony was. He said, you're automatic. He said, I must sign this and approve it. And he said, the British governor here, well, was administrator then. No, it was governor. Mr. Long was here. And he said, and Mr. Cum had already been made the first governor, but he didn't come here as governor, as you all know more than me about that. And he said, I cannot refuse to sign it. He said, no one can, no British politician. He said, it's time or immigration people.
You had it by operation of law. The law conferred it upon you.
Yes.
Yes, he said. So the British governor cannot refuse it. He said only Her Majesty would have the power to do that. He said this could never be seen by Her Majesty.
I'm not even sure that she had the power to do it unless you repeal the law.
Repeal the law, yes.
And all rights that went with it.
So I know what that is. I think the 2 most infamous years in our history, and listening to you all about the many dates and learning a lot, was 1898 when no Caymanian stepped up to the plate to continue our more or less self-ruled, self-governed system with the Chief Justice acting as custos in essence the governor, because they put their laws into effect as the House, the vestrymen and the magistrates debated and put their laws into. No one stepped up to the plate, and that's when they sent down Sheddon Sanguinetti. I think Mr. McField, wasn't it, 1898? He became the first governor. Then it was Stevenson Sirthurst after that. And then the other year to me is 1983, when the British Nationality Act came into force. At the same time, we set aside the turtle farm too. Can you hear me, gentlemen?
Yes, we are.
yes,
we are.
yes, we
I
can.
thought I'd been cut off. Anyway, I just want to listen to you all, and thank you so very much for giving this knowledge out to our public. We need to know these things, what really took place, the political machinations and interference and so forth. But to me, right now, we have our MLAs are at the weakest point in history. I thought we would strive forward to something like what Bermuda has. I'm very disappointed. I respect them all, and I commend anyone who put forth his hat to run for election and so forth. But I'm just so disappointed that we're not moving forward. We're regressing as far as giving control of our country to our own people. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurston. Let's go to the other caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
You need an institution. I think you're working on something.
You need to turn the radio down, please.
Mentally.
Hello? Need to turn the radio down. Good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
You be walking the road and
Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
hello.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah. Good morning, OC.
Morning, how are you?
Okay. This is Franklin Smith.
How are you doing, Mr. Smith?
Good morning to Mr. Mike Peel
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
and to my friend there,
Christopher.
Chris.
Yeah.
Chris.
Morning, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Mike Peel and Mr. Connor, I heard you speaking just now about the like laws that have been changed to suit one or two people.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you an example of law being changed.
Okay.
The 1972 Road Code law was retroactive, brought in when a government truck, the driver only had one eye, he hit my vehicle, and as a result of him causing the accident, the one person was killed. Okay? And I forget what the Attorney General name was at the time. I'm trying to remember, burst in my head just. But Mr. Benson, Mr. Warren, and I don't remember who the other executive council members were. But they worked diligently. It's the most piece of unconstitutional, criminal law that could have ever been put on record.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
That executive council produced that to keep me out of my rightful thing.
and what did the law say? What did it do?
What they done was they changed the law from that you had to be looking in your rear view mirror and side mirrors at the same time, because that was the claim of this person. Because that happened on the 27th day of December morning, the 27th day of December 1972, and they would not allow me. I was told to be set air ambulance off of this island until I could give my evidence in writing. Rexford, I think that's...
Got about a minute left before we have to go to headline news, caller.
Well, I'm just telling you that the thing was that the police officer that came to my hospital room a few days later said I could not leave the island, and my family was told I could not be set off. Now, they virtually left me there to die. Was their hope, and they fought me all the way through in the courts, because the same judge hearing the inquiry on the next case, and they refused me for 3 years, refused me another judge because I wouldn't allow them to sit on my civil case. They would not allow me to bring in, or they would not bring in another judge to hear the case. So I often wonder how, well, Mr. Warren is gone, how Mr. Benson sleeps knowing that he was part of that criminal act.
I would be careful. I would be very careful in terms of your words there in relation to criminality. If it was done under law, you can't say that.
No, they did not do it under law. They did it to keep me out of my justice.
I'm going to ask you to leave us there, caller. We have to go to headline news now. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My guest in studio with me this morning, Mr. Steve Macfield, Mr. Christopher Saunders. We're going to headline news. Please stay tuned. When we come back, the discussion will continue. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. No one on the phone lines at this point in time, so we're going to continue the discussion. So, Mr. Macfield and Mr. Saunders, we saw the 1972 law where if you were born in the Cayman Islands or of parents, one of whom was resident in
at the time of your
birth, you automatically had Caymanian status.
That's right.
That continued up until 1977, and on the 17th day of March, 1977, Mr. Thomas Russell was the president of the Legislative Assembly then. We had passed in the legislature the Caymanian Protection Amendment Law 1977, Law 7 of 1977. And in that law, we changed some of the provisions in relation to acquisition of Caymanian status by birth. And it says here then, in any case where a person, and notice what they use there now, in any case, they didn't say, they changed the wording, they learned their lesson, right? In any case where a person, after the coming into operation of this law, born in these islands, then in any such case he shall possess Caymanian status if both of the following conditions are fulfilled. So you had to fulfill two conditions then, right?
Yes.
One was at least one of his parents must at the time of his birth possess Caymanian status. So one parent must be Caymanian, and both parents must at the time of his birth be domiciled in these islands. And they use the word domicile, which becomes, is something really tricky. But just to point out here, and when you called in on Wednesday when we talk about this was in relation to a legitimate child or a legitimated child.
That's right. That's
not
right.
in relation to an
illegitimate
child. And there are provisions in the law about illegitimate children well. Now, on the question of domicile, I have so much paperwork. I've kept a lot of it. This was a legal opinion that was given by the legal department February 11, 1992. And says a domicile of choice is acquired by the combination of residence in a particular country and this is key, the intention to permanently reside in that country. Once these factors have been established, the law will recognize domicile of choice. Now, a domicile, you can have there are two domiciles, domicile of origin and domicile of choice. So my domicile of origin would be, where I was born and where I grew up.
Yes.
And then my domicile of choice is if I choose now to reside in another country.
And how do you show your intention?
Right. So they always say it can be a state of mind.
That's right.
It can be a state of mind. But you're the legal person.
How do you demonstrate in Canada? It says Canada, they say if you have a plot of land, cases have gone to the Supreme Court in Canada that have said if you have a rented apartment and if you still have clothes hanging in your closet, it means that you intend to come back there to wear your clothes again. That means that you have your domicile there, that you have given up that. It's a state of mind. And the courts will look at all the circumstances to see whether or not your state of mind is that you intend to come back, you intend to live there permanently for the rest of your life. So domicile is a very tricky thing, and a lot of countries don't like it in their
I think we have
legislation.
finally removed it out of our
Removed-
legislation
we have
as
removed
well.
it through
Yes.
our legislation too, because a lot of
Because it's open to
countries do it.
interpretation.
It's open to all kinds of interpretation, because they can say if you have been willed a grave plot by your grandparents, that this is where we have this plot set up for you, that's your domicile, there.
Yeah, I got someone that sent me messages asking about Mr. Orman Panton and yourself forming the
Caymanian Bar Association.
Yeah. But I noticed in the book you have something from the Caymanian Law Society. Is there a difference or something?
They're different. They were different from us, and we formed the Caymanian Bar Association because our problems, our circumstances were different from the Law Society. And in 1988, we formed the Cayman Bar Association. Myself, Mr. Orman Panton, Mr. Levy, Mr. Keith Collins, Mr. Ori Marion, and Mr. Peter Polak.
No females?
Well, they joined after.
Okay.
But at that evening, when I drafted the first articles memorandum for the Bar Association, and when I drafted it, we had a clause in it that said that you could only be a member of the Bar Association if you're born Caymanian. Now, to have it registered as a non-profit organization, you have to have it registered by the Executive Council at the time. And when we sent it there to the Executive Council, they sent it back and said that they couldn't accept that because it would discriminate against people of Caymanian status.
Okay. I think we have one caller online.
Yes.
You finished there, Mr. Mapp?
Yeah, and we had to take that clause out. And when we launched it that evening, we invited all of the Caymanian status lawyers then, and they came and they said that they were surprised that we wanted to have a separate association from the Law Society, because they said, what's the problem here? And we said, one of the things that we said, that you remember when the government was changing the law in drug cases to reverse the onus of proof, the burden of proof. That was one of the reasons why. The burden of proof is the golden thread. The burden of proof on the prosecution is the golden thread that runs all through the criminal law, and we changed it to say that you are guilty of an offense if you import a container and it has drugs in it or something like that. And none of the people from the Law Society would help us to try to get that law overturned. Those are some of the things that we had to form the Bar Association for, and they wouldn't join that afternoon. And they wouldn't join that afternoon. You know when they joined? In 1991. Was it in 2001 when the UDP took over the government, and the UDP said the lawyers had to pay more money. And that evening, when we were having the general meeting, and they had the general meeting in Hunter's office, and when we went there to have the meeting that afternoon, we saw all of the expatriate lawyers who hadn't joined. They were present. And we say, what happened? Say they joined that week, and they voted us out. And now they are the Bar Association. The Bar Association and the Law Society is in the same office.
Wow.
Okay. One caller online. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. O'Connor.
Good morning. How are you?
Okay, and good morning to you, yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, Mr. Connor, when they gave away those 3,000 statuses at that time, yeah, well, me and some Georgetown, I was up at a glass house.
2003. Tell me about it. Yeah.
They passed out statuses like toilet paper. Well, at that time, Mr. Connor, were you the chief immigration officer?
No, I was. I was the chief immigration officer when the first tranche of Caymanian status was granted, and those they were granted by to a very prominent and wealthy family in the Cayman Islands at that time, and that was done, I believe, at the behest of that individual's lawyers, for them to have some security of tenure here. And it was done dribblingly for a few, and then once I believe, and this is just my speculation, that once legislators saw that it was done, then they all got into the fray, because as chief of immigration officer, I kept seeing more and more approvals coming over from the executive council in relation to it. In 2003, July of 2003, I moved over as chief immigration officer to the cabinet office as cabinet secretary. And that is where I inherited most of it then, because that's when we had the long lists of people being recommended, and the long lines outside, and the long lines over at the police station with people applying for police records and stuff like that. So I was part on immigration. I can also say that on the immigration side, I, as chief immigration officer, was not alerted that cabinet was doing this. My advice was not sought on it. No members of the board knew about it as well. It was just simply done by cabinet, and everyone was surprised. No input whatsoever from anyone on the immigration side, either the board or the chief immigration officer.
And I don't know if it's true, but I was told that PPM government granted 1,800 statuses not too much long after that.
No.
When they
No, remember they were the ones that moved the motion in the Legislative Assembly to change it,
Yes.
so that any thing done now in relation by cabinet, a recommendation has to be made, and then it also has to be approved by the Legislative Assembly.
Assembly,
Yes,
that's
yes.
right.
So that's not true.
so
If they granted it, if status was granted under the PPN administration, it would have been granted by virtue of the provisions of the law and granted by the board.
Yes.
So how this status thing go now? You can get status because of the finances that you have.
Well, right now there's a series of things that you have to go through, a point system and everything else, in relation to residence, and then you apply for Caymanian status, and it has to be done over a longer period of time. I think the period of time, it takes you 15 years if you're applying on grounds of residence, because you have to first become a British Overseas Territorial Citizen, and 5 years after becoming a British Overseas Territorial Citizen, then you have to apply. So you have to go through all the hoops if you're doing it on the basis of residence. You have to get beyond the term limit period. After you get beyond the term limit period and you get permanent residence, then you have to be naturalized, and after naturalization, then you have to apply for a grant. That's on the grounds of residence. There are still grounds of marriage and other grounds of descent and stuff like that don't have the same qualifications.
And to get it on the long residence, you can only apply after 8 years residence and not more than 9 years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so if a person comes here now, and because they buy up a whole heap of land and their finances are good,
that in itself won't help them. No, that in itself won't help them.
That might help you to get some points for ownership on property and investment, but that is in itself not.
That in itself isn't.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because Cayman is too small to be given away statuses they're not worth anything. Because when you give an individual something they don't deserve, then they don't appreciate it the way that they should. And by them not appreciating it the way that they should, then they use it in the way that they shouldn't be using it. When I say that, then, for example, not appreciating being able to live here in Cayman and better their lives and respect and honor the Cayman people. Because one thing I noticed about Caymanians, you don't have Caymanians going to another man country and running down the next man, and disrespecting his laws and so forth. So when those people
at least
come
we don't
here
hear
and
much
do
about
that,
it.
At least it's not reported.
Huh?
At least it's not reported.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've lived in different places in the world. When I say that in the United States, I'm talking about that.
Call, I'm going to ask you to wrap up. We've got a couple more callers in.
Yeah, and I've never heard anybody talking negative about a Caymanian bashing their citizens and their country and their laws and so forth. So when people come here and do that with us, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, thank you very much, caller. Have a great day.
You.
Next caller. Good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
Morning, gentlemen. This is Arden McLean.
Good morning,
Hey, how
Mr.
you doing?
McLean.
Morning, Arden.
Morning, how you guys doing?
We're doing fine. We're doing just great. How are you up in the east there?
Good. Nice, good weather.
Yes.
To you.
Good farming
Yeah.
weather.
That's right. I was commenting on that on Wednesday.
Yes.
I've been listening to you all quite intently, and two things I want to comment on. OC said that when those grants started, all politicians then jump on board. I think that was basically what he said.
I know members of executive council.
Oh,
Okay,
well,
yeah.
well, I just want to clarify that to distance myself from that, because I recall the leader of government business at the time bringing a note over to the leader of the opposition, who was Kurt, and Kurt then meeting with us and saying that they were going to issue 500 status for the quincentennial, and they were offering us 35. So there were 5 of us over there, and that would have been 7 each, right? And I told Kurt, someone else can take mine.
And I must clarify, Mr. McLean, also that there were even some members of the executive council who did not participate in it. There were some who flatly refused to participate in it as well and did not submit names. I have to withdraw. I have to withdraw my broad statement that I made that said, all members. Some did.
Yeah, and I know precisely who they are. Too.
Yeah. Okay.
And I got a namesake that was there that refused to. Anyway, the other thing is I want to say to Steve, and I have a lot of time for Steve Maxfield. He has been a fighter in our country for justice for people, and unfortunately, he didn't get in a position to carry that fight to a point where it could result in tangibly. That's unfortunate for my people. Number 2, he has never, ever been recognized for that fight. That's unfortunate when you have people who believe in your people. I was fortunate enough to be elected. The people of East End took a chance on me. And I have tried to make my contribution, not looking for notoriety, not looking for publicity. I'm not into a beauty contest. The only thing I have is my people. And that's who I fight for, Steve, just like you.
Can I ask
but
you?
I promise you, Steve Maxfield, that this thing with these lawyers is not dead. We may all be gone, but they got to remember that Arden McLean was here with this. Because the same fight you had to get your Caymanian lawyers to come with you, I am currently having. Unfortunately, wasn't in the position I'm in. The reason why you had that fight, and I am having that fight, is because others have dominated this arena, this industry, that profession, and they have ostracized our people. They did it with you, Steve, and they're doing it today. They came out and attacked me the other day. I went back at them and challenged them. Show me. And I keep repeating this thing. We know how many of your partners we made Caymanians. You tell us. The question is, how many of us Caymanians did you make partners?
Yeah, Mr. McLean,
Steve, they must understand this fight is not over.
Thank you.
Let me tell you, those who are with the political will, who continues to stop this legal practitioners bill getting in place because of people like myself who fight against the provisions they want to put in it, they are too going to be exposed for not helping their own Caymanian people, for not putting the provisions in place, Steve, that Caymanians rise as well as others.
Okay, Mr. McLean, ask you if you can leave
Thank
us
you very
there.
much,
We
Mr.
want to
McLean.
take one
Thank
more
you very
call. And after this call, Paul, we're going to close the lines because we still two things we want to talk about. I need to talk about the fact we've talked about birth in the Cayman Islands. We need to mention birth outside the Cayman Islands as well. I want to talk about the Attridge case, and we need to talk about the Hatchegate clause as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. We're going to ask you to be as brief as
Good
possible.
morning again, gentlemen.
Morning again, sir.
Very brief. I'm glad Mr. McLean called and sort of bolstered my sort of disappointment and our MLAs standing up. And the reason why I said this, because I speak to a lot of tourists every day in my job, and there are many who are retief. And one of them said to me the other day, he said, faced with the little power that your legislative assembly members have, why do you bother with elections and just let the British take you over under direct control? And, he said, I said to him, for the first time in my almost 70 years, I was stumped for an answer to that question. I said to him, I guess we have to show some semblance of democracy, because democracy is an elected government, not appointed. And I guess that's the main reason behind it. That is the only answer I could give to him. I just wondered two things. Remember, I asked about us if it happens, and it could happen, that the British monarchy is finished with, and that's who we hold allegiance to. Our Constitution was to frame the right around all that allegiance to the Queen, Her Majesty, and the reigning monarch, and everything. Wouldn't we have to swear allegiance now, if we so choose, rewrite a new constitution, go to the British political directorate in power and say, well, we swear allegiance to you all to remain, or should we hold a referendum and decide what the people do? Because it's going to cost a lot of money. We know that. It costs a lot to be on our own, costs a lot for us to remain a crown colony. And don't you think we should be speaking to our people about the possibility of us going independent and preparing them for it? Don't you think we should start now?
That conversation has to take place, caller.
I
Definitely
agree,
has
caller.
to
Thank
take
you
place.
very
We have to
much,
start.
gentlemen. I listen on to your
Thank you very much to Mr. Hurst. And folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, Mr. Steve Macfield, Mr. Christopher Saunders, and we just simply don't have enough time to talk about all of this, but we're going to squeeze as much out of the fruit as we can. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're in the wrap-up section now. Just to point out again, we talked about the Caymanian Protection Law 1972, and it conferred Caymanian status on any person who's a child who was born in the Cayman Islands or of parents who was resident in the Cayman Islands, that you had Caymanian status. So, and it made no distinction. So it says born in the Cayman Islands or of parents. So
Yes.
it made no distinction between whether or not you were born inside or out, because if you were born outside of the islands,
Yes.
as long as the parents fulfilled
Yes,
the
right.
requirements, you had it too. So on the basis of that, we were able to acknowledge persons who were born overseas to Caymanian parents as possessing Caymanian status. Then the 1977 revision of the law then put in a section in there not only about persons who were born in the Cayman Islands, but in any case where a person is after the 27th of March 1972 born outside these islands, then in any such case he shall possess Caymanian status if all of the following conditions are fulfilled. That is to say, so if you were born outside the islands, you must immediately after the birth be a British subject.
Yes.
And I'll explain that. At least one of his parents must, at the time of his birth, possess Caymanian status, and both parents must, at the time, be domiciled. So both parents had to be domiciled, one parent had to possess Caymanian status, and you had to be a British subject. So, for instance, if you were born in the United States of America to a father who was a British subject, then you had to refer to the British Nationality Act to see whether or not you acquired British overseas territorial citizenship, or at that time it was British dependent territorial citizenship by virtue of the British Nationality Act. So you had to determine that. Well, you had the 48
citizens of the British United Kingdom
and colonies, citizen of the UK and
yes,
colonies,
colonies,
then
yeah.
British dependent territory
That's
citizen,
right.
then overseas British citizen. Now, I'm going to take this point here just to point out that up until 1984, one of the basic requirements were that you had to be a British subject. We changed that in 1984, and we in the 1984 legislation, not only did you have to be a British subject, but we put in some of the other qualifications, and it said if you were a United States citizen,
Exactly.
As well. That was the Hadjigate clause.
The
And very
Hadjigate
quickly,
clause,
Mr.
right,
McField,
yeah.
tell us about Mr. Hadjigate.
Well, I can't tell you that much right now because I don't remember that too well, but I know that I was on the platform. I know that I was on the platform, and I think I got some bad repercussions for that. I think that was one of the things that that really destroyed my career, because I was on the platform and I was accusing the government at those days of selling our citizenship for, I think it was $250,000. I think is what you had to have.
He was the man who was involved with the oil transfer, wasn't he?
No. That was Mr. Van der Linde.
Oh, okay.
He was involved in the development. He was involved in several developments with Mr. Jim Borden. And I think one of the things he was involved in was the properties that he had bought from off the Marians in Pageant Beach.
Okay.
They had bought that property and stuff, but it's not that I'm foggy, but I remember that did me so bad that I was accused of treason and being a communist and everything, and I was on the platform trying to persuade Caymanians that clause should never have gone into the law, but that was Hadjigate clause to give the rich man from Texas the right to apply for Cayman status and the right to executive council to confer Cayman status on people like that, because all along you had to be British. You had to be a British subject or connected with the British Commonwealth in some way.
Commonwealth, yes.
Some way.
And then we added America.
And then we added Americans to it
that.
too.
Okay, let's go now to the Edward James Attridge case.
Yes.
Now, at that time, under the Protection Law 1984, and that came into force on the 27th of March 1985, Section 69, subsection 3 of that law read, the governor may from time to time issue policy directions to the board and to the chief immigration officer for their guidance in the exercise of their respective powers, duties, and functions under this law, and it shall be the duty of the board and the chief immigration officer to put into effect and to carry out those directions. So the directions were given. Now, in those directions, we had...
And the governor in those days mean governor and council.
Governor and council, right.
Governor and council.
Right. And we used annual quotas
They were annual quotas. First, the quota
for the
was
grant
for
of
3 or 4,
Caymanian
and then
status.
and the quota was 25 a year.
Right, 25 a year, right?
Yes.
Now, what they did was that the board would grant the 25 per
Yes,
year,
yes.
and then they would turn around and report to executive council on those that they had granted
That's right.
status. Now, I believe that was a conflict there in itself, because executive council under the immigration law at the time was also the appellate
body.
So how do you
right.
let executive council know these are the people that you granted and seek their nod of approval for it? So those persons who are aggrieved by the board's decision not to grant their Caymanian status
Would have to apply
appeal to executive council who had already decided who would get it in the first place.
That's right.
So, Mr. Attridge, someone then
So they had
ahead.
recommended 25 people. All the names had gone up.
Yep.
They had decided on who the 25 would be. Mr. Attridge was one of those, but they refused to publish it.
Well, they went back and then decided then that they would not do anything with those until the new law came into effect.
That's
So
right.
it says here, and this court case has the executive council extract as well.
Yes.
And extract 2766. Number 58 of 1984, grant of Caymanian status. Council advised that the 1983 quota for the grant of Caymanian status should be withdrawn and that a quota for 1984 should be considered after the enactment of the new Caymanian Protection Law. And someone put that in Mr. Attridge's mailbox.
Yes, right.
And as a result of that, he brought the court action.
That's
and
right.
As a result of that, all of those persons
all 25
no, it was 100 and odd
yes,
of
that's
people
right.
who had applied for status
That's
then
right.
were
Who had
able to
applied.
get it.
Yes,
were
right.
able to get it
That's
as
right.
a result of that. Again, goes to show you some of the shenanigans that some
That's
of our
right.
politicians played. Sometimes they were trying to be protective of the Cayman Islands, because let's look at it in this respect. Here we have a small island. If we compare ourselves to, say, Fiji, right, where there is always that risk of you losing your national identity if you're overrun, by other nationalities as well. So what they were doing were protective to a certain extent. We see other cases where they were cherry picking and deciding who would get what. But that was the main concern. So our immigration laws progressed to a certain extent to try to protect Caymanians, protect the Caymanian heritage. What you saw, for instance, when we brought in the rollover policy, and I remind people that before we had a rollover policy in the early 2000s, that in the mid-1990s, we had something called a Directive 1C,
exactly,
where
yes,
you work for 2 years,
yes,
and then you had to leave. For 6 months
That's
before you
right.
could come back and
Come back
and
again.
get one. So we had that
Yes.
long before that as well. But gentlemen, I think we've reached that time.
And-
Chris,
and-
you haven't had a whole lot
No,
to say today,
no,
but
listen,
it's a learning moment for
I
you.
will say
I
this
would like to
much.
say something before you go.
No, you're going to get a time to wrap up, Mr. McPhee.
Okay,
No problem.
okay,
Go ahead,
okay.
Chris.
No, I will say one thing. This has been a very learning show. I learned a lot, and I got a lot of messages from people who had pretty much said pretty much the same thing also. My contribution, and it was good to see exactly where we're coming from, so we can kind of understand where we are right now. And if you look at pretty much, the purpose of immigration itself, outside of the normal border control, is you're looking at, and also our international obligation, is to either grow the population and address labor shortages within the economy. And if need be, also give us some increase in diversity and everything else. I think for us, our issue has always been the fact that rather than use immigration for what immigration should have been, we've kind of bastardized it where it became used for social engineering and also economic engineering. And I think that is what has led to some of the challenges that we have. You look at the previous immigration law where you had to have key to have remained in the country to not get rollover. The only way you could have gotten key is unless your employer decided that you was a key employee. So in essence, it was the employers who were choosing who were becoming Caymanian, as opposed to people a level playing field to some extent. And what it does require, and going back and listening to some of the contributions, and even from some of the callers, is that the same challenges we had then, where people have been trying to manipulate the system for their own selfish purpose, continues even to today. Where, and you see it again from the engineering standpoint. So our goal right now as a people and as a country is to develop a long-term plan in terms of what it is that we need. I've said it before, I believe that the work permit system should be subject to the market system, in a sense. If we have a supply of Caymanian labor within a particular area, jobs that Caymanians should do, those work permits should be costing $25,000, $30,000 because we have Caymanians can do the work. Equally so, if we trying to attract labor, a particular skills, and the Caymanians aren't available to do it, then by all means we lower those permits. But we can't be having permits for $375, $1,200, jobs that Caymanians can do, and then at the end of the day, not realize that we are creating this kind of social unrest by not giving our people an opportunity within their country. And that's why it is important for us to get this right, but more important for us to have a plan and a vision for the country in terms of where we want to go. And immigration will have to play a big part in that role.
Okay. Mr. McPhee?
Well, I would like to thank Mr. McLean for the kind words that he said this morning about myself. But of course, I'm not over perturbed because I didn't get any accolades and I didn't get any awards for things I have done. I've done them because I guess I'm an iconoclast and a person who was a mover. And there's an old saying. I think there are those who do. How does it work? How does it say? There are those who do, and there's those who don't do. I'm one of the person who does things, and I don't do them for reward. I do them because I feel that I have to do them in my life. I think what we have demonstrated this morning too is that all of these years from the 1970s, we still haven't got an immigration law that works, and that's something that we can that's solid, that we can rely upon. Can you imagine if the American immigration system would be changing so rapidly? What would happen to the American system? And what it also showed us too is that the great people of yesteryear, the great people, they have all been forgotten. Most of them have all been forgotten. But I am so happy this morning that Orit brought the book. What's it called? A Special Son. Because I am proud to walk in the footprints of men like Mr. Ormond Panton. He was one of my mentors, and he grew me, and we were great friends. I remember he would, if the day went by and I didn't call him, he would say to me, "Is something wrong with you?" And we always went to a place called Gwen's Inn, up in a little restaurant behind Rogelio's car wash. That's the only place that he ate outside of his home. Yep. He never ate any place else. And I'm going to leave you with this little anecdote, with this story. One time we were in there and we were talking about Mr. Norman Borden's popularity, how Mr. Norman had swept the polls, and Norman had come top of the polls in the polls, and also the first elected member for Executive Council. So we were inside Miss Olga's restaurant that one day and getting lunch, and Mr. Ormond said to me, "Mr. Steve, he said, I'm going to have some fun with Olga. Now just listen to this." So I said, "Olga, what's this kind of thing is, man? You be Mark V and I here, we sitting waiting for our lunch, and you flustering yourself, getting lunch, sending it down to Norman. Why Norman can't come up here to get his lunch himself? Why you have to be packing up lunch to send to Norman?" He says, "I know why Norman can't come up here to get lunch from you, Olga. Busy building that big old mansion down in Webster's Estate. That's why he can't come." Miss Olga rushed out the kitchen, put her hand in Kimbo. She said, "That's not true." She said, "Mr. Panton, that's not true. Mr. Ormond told me that he's only building a small two-little bedroom house for him and Jane. And Mr. Ormond said, "You see, Steve, if Norman came up here and told Olga that this restaurant was a toilet, they would believe it." That is how the people of those days believe it.
Yes,
and believe their politicians. Mr. Ormond was one of them, a great man, a great patriot.
What was the saying that they had with him about following Mr. Ormond?
A good patriot. And
it's in the book too.
And he would, when I used to go to his meetings, and he would have his QQ white rum in his back pocket, drinking just like everybody. Say, "Take a sip, Mr. Ormond. Tell us and take a sip. Take a sip, Mr. Ormond, and tell us." And Mr. Ormond would roll up, had his shirt sleeve roll up. He had his long arms. His arms looked like about 10 feet long, and his fingers pointing. And he would say, "When I get power, I'm going to take this country far away from the British as possible." And people say, "We will follow Ormond Panton. We will follow Ormond Panton till we die." They had made up a song about him, and that was that continued until 1965, when he finally left politics in 1965 election.
Yeah. And he talks about the fact also one of the first, when he was the one that pushed to have the U.S. Council come here.
He did that.
For visas and
the
stuff
waiver.
because of the waiver program.
That's
because,
right. It was him.
We would have to go to either Jamaica or Cuba
That's
at
right.
the time, because Cuba, American influence was there, the American embassy was there and stuff like that.
He pushed that
and
scheme.
And he pushed for that. And that was one of the reasons in one of his court cases that he took it all the way to the Court of Appeals, because
That's right.
if he had gotten the conviction, he traveled to the United States quite a bit,
right.
on business and stuff
That's
like
right. He
that.
wouldn't be able to
and
do
he
that.
would not be able to
He
travel
wouldn't
because, on the waiver system, all
That's
you do is
right.
you produce a clean police
Police
clearance
record.
certificate.
Yes, right.
And that conviction would have had that, because one of his lawyers asked him, "Why do you continue to fight this?" Because
Yes.
in the one of the appeal cases, they had reduced the fine from £8 to £4,
£4.
and they said, "Why don't you just pay
No.
it?"
No.
And he said there are
Yes.
two reasons. reasons
Yes,
why
that's
I'm
right.
not paying. I'm not paying it because I am not guilty. I feel that I was wrong. And number two, I
need to have a
afford- I
clean
need to have a
record.
clean police record.
And that was him. I enjoyed him while he was with us. He was the first president of the Caymanian Bar Association. I was his vice president. When he died, I became president. And it seems like when he died, the whole thing died with him. I don't see any other politicians coming along of his stature. And I am so, although I'm an optimist and optimistic about the future, it's grim, really. And as someone said to me yesterday, they wish that something could happen. Some other special son could come along and could lead us out of the wilderness and back to where we were, at least in the 1970s and 80s, and give us a chance again to revitalize ourselves.
Gentlemen, I want to again thank you for being here and having such an interesting show, allowing the show to be so interesting and so informative, to our guests, as well. Before I leave, I also want to say today is Craig Marin's birthday, so happy
birthday, Craig.
to Craig Marin as well. Sherry Ann Smith also.
Happy birthday, Prince Craig.
And happy birthday, Sherry Ann. Folks, I want to remind you that you've been listening to For the Record. I've been your host, Stuart Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning, Mr. Alan Steve MacPhail, prominent attorney, historian, and it's all residing right in his head. And we have Mr. Christopher Saunders, political pundit, political candidate, accountant, everything, and today more of a student than anything else as well. With us in the studio, I want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. You hear the stories about people like Mr. Ormond Panton, who was his, brothers keepers as well. And if you read the book, you will see the background about Mr. Ormond, and you would see, where his family came from, and it was a mixed family at the end of the day because some of his forefathers went to Africa
That's
first,
right.
and married Native Africans over there.
That's right.
When they came over to this side of the world, some of the Pantons went to Jamaica. Some of the Pantons came to the Cayman Islands. So read that book, A Special Son. When I picked it up to do some research on it, I started reading and I couldn't stop. I didn't want to put it down.
A must.
Afterwards. So we are our brothers and our keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then please donate to a worthy charity. Always consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. Have a great day, safe weekend. Monday's a holiday. Enjoy the holiday as well. Memorial Day. We should never forget those who sacrificed their lives so that we could have the freedom that we enjoy today as well. Continue to listen to Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for Talk Today. God bless. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.